Number 1, ask questions constantly rather than just telling the student the information. Make it interactive. If you're teaching in person, this is a great way to check in and make sure that the student isn't zoning out and that they're actually listening, and most importantly, that they're actually understanding. Because oftentimes when people are in lessons, they'll sort of say, oh yeah, yep, and you say, you understand? They say, yep, I got it. But they might not really understand it. They're just sort of saying that, maybe for whatever reason. Maybe they're embarrassed, tired, zoned out, whatever. But if you ask them questions and make them tell you the answer, then that really gives you a chance to check in to make sure that they're actually understanding. Even when I'm making an educational video and I can't hear the response of whoever is watching the video, I still ask questions constantly to the camera because it just makes it more engaging and it makes it feel more interactive too. Number 2, this is one of the most important things I think in teaching, and this is one of the things that I think gets overlooked the most. And so my number 2 is don't overlook the order in which you teach things. Information can usually be taught in different orders, but you want to make sure you can deliver it in the most logical and easy to understand way. And it's really important to put a lot of thought into that order. This is honestly one of the things that I spend the most time fretting about and thinking about when I'm teaching. I'm trying to wrap my head around, should I explain this first or that first? Because honestly, sometimes it's very surprising which order works best. I've found that oftentimes in textbooks, the information is really great, but the order that the information is given throughout the textbook is really bad. So yeah, order, so important. It honestly takes a lot of intense thinking, dare I say some creativity too, an ability to put yourself in the student's shoes, an ability to think back on your own personal learning history. What was it that made it click for me? Kind of trying to relearn it yourself while you're figuring out what order is best. And I think it's one of the key secret ingredients to good teaching. And it's just something that people really don't think about very often, but it's the thing that people get wrong the most. Number 3, leave out information that is unnecessary for that specific lesson. It's really important to not go off on too many tangents or put too much information into a lesson. Oftentimes what we leave out of a lesson can be just as important as what we put into the lesson. And this also goes, I think, hand in hand with number 2 as far as the order in which we're teaching things. Sure, there are little tangents I could go off of, or I could explain something in even more depth right now in this lesson, but it might distract from the point I'm trying to get to. And if we're trying to teach in a good order, I should actually save this information for another lesson in the future, because I want to keep things in a very clear path, an easy to follow path. If you throw too much information at people at once, they're going to get overwhelmed and they're going to just check out mentally. You can, of course, add a few little side notes to keep it exciting, especially if you think it's interesting and worth sharing and important. But don't get too distracted from the thing you're really trying to teach in that moment. And if you think it's going to take you too far away from that, maybe leave it out. Number 4 is provide and work through lots of examples. Examples are crucial for people to truly understand a concept. I know I personally don't understand anything unless I'm given examples, and it's important to give many examples to your students. These are all tips for teaching any subject, but I will say that specifically for music, when teaching music theory, it's really important to provide examples in different keys. I would say that most of your lesson should be giving examples and solving them together. It's also great to include any analogies if you have good analogies to give. By the way, if you're enjoying this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment to say hey. Number 5, make your student do the work. If someone asks you a question, you might be tempted to just quickly give them the answer, but it's better to work through the problem together to show them how you got that answer. Oftentimes when you're teaching a group lesson, students will ask questions that really are going to take the class off track for a little bit or slow down the momentum that you were going on. In those moments, I don't want to derail the lesson by answering their question, but I do still want to work through the question with them. So what I'll often say is I'll say, that's a great question. I'm going to get back to that in like 5-10 minutes. Let me just finish explaining this one thing, and then we'll go back to your question and we'll work through it with the whole class. And then when you do get to their question, you say, okay, so let's figure this out together. And you take them step by step, and you ask them questions, and you sort of guide them through that process of getting to the answer. That's just so much more valuable than you just telling it to them. Number 6, don't assume that your students know everything. Now, obviously there are certain situations where you might really truly know what your students know. Maybe it's because it's a class you've been teaching for a long time, whatever the reason. There are some exceptions to this. But if you're making let's say an educational YouTube video, you have no idea who they are, what they know, and so you don't want to assume that they know anything, really. I think the most important thing to remember is that people don't like feeling lost in a lesson. Sometimes when I'm a student, I'll be following along for the first 2 minutes or so of the lesson, or however long, and then suddenly I'll say, wait, what? What's going on? And I'll feel totally lost and confused, and I'll realize, wait, the teacher just jumped to something that I just don't know what's happening. And that's not a good feeling. It makes me check out mentally, it makes me lose focus, it makes me feel sort of discouraged. It's just not a good feeling, and you don't ever want your students to feel that way. If someone is taking the time to sit down and learn something new, you want to make sure that they can follow you through the whole journey of the lesson. If they can follow you the whole time, they will be, number one, actually learning something, which is of course the goal, and number two, they're going to feel good about themselves and appreciate your lesson. Number 7, this one sort of ties into number 6, and it is always explain terminology. Terminology is so often where people will get lost, and it's such an easy thing to avoid because all you have to do is just stop and quickly explain what that term means. This means don't use tons of acronyms and shorthand unless you've already explained to the students what all these things mean. Too much shorthand can really be overwhelming. Oftentimes a student will be able to follow everything you're saying, but just because they don't know what one term is that you used, it'll totally throw them off. They'll start thinking, God, what does that mean? Did I learn that? No, does it mean this? Does it mean that? And they're going to be sitting there trying to figure it out. Next thing they know, they've tuned out from the lesson. They're totally lost. They don't know what's happening anymore in the lesson. It's just very distracting and very confusing when a teacher uses a term or word that you don't know. So always encourage your students to stop and ask questions if they don't know what a certain word or term means. Because sometimes it's just that one hiccup and it throws off the whole lesson for the student. And that's such a shame because, as I said, they probably would be able to understand everything if they just knew what that one term meant. Number 8, try to anticipate questions students might have and answer them. If not during the lesson, at the end of the lesson. You can say, hey, I know you might be feeling confused about X, Y, and Z, or you might be asking yourself, hey, blah, 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 blah. Well, if you're asking that question, don't worry, I'm going to get to that at the very end of the lesson. And then sometimes people will be thinking that and they'll go, oh, okay, good. I'm glad she's going to get to that later. Figuring out the parts of the lesson that are the most confusing and then explaining that specific thing as many ways as possible. What's the tricky part? When you get there in the lesson, slow it down. Break it down in as many different ways as you can. Number 9, never be condescending, annoyed, impatient, or laugh at your student if they are wrong or are confused at all about anything. I had a teacher once who used to chuckle and snort and laugh to themselves whenever I gave the wrong answer or said, I don't know, or was just confused in any way. And I absolutely hated it. And I remember telling myself, man, I will never do that if I'm teaching somebody because it really made me feel bad. I'm a pretty easygoing person. I really don't take myself very seriously. And when people make fun of me, I really don't mind it very much. However, in a teaching setting, in a learning environment, you're kind of putting yourself out there when you're taking a lesson. And it's just really not the time or place to make fun of a student for not knowing something. You can make fun of your students for doing other stuff, but for getting the answer wrong or for being confused, nah. Whenever we're taking a lesson, we want to follow along the whole time. Nobody goes into a lesson saying, yeah, I want to get totally lost and not understand anything and feel like a total idiot. Nobody does that. Everyone wants to feel like they get it, that they understand it. And so, as a teacher, you need to make sure your students feel that way. And you definitely don't want to laugh at them if they get the answer wrong or are confused or don't know the answer. That just means you need to explain it better. And that's something that you should take seriously. You would think that this seems obvious, but that same teacher also used to act really annoyed and impatient whenever I didn't get something or was confused. That's also not a good thing to do. You want to make sure your students know that you respect them, their intelligence, and their ability to learn, and that it's totally okay to feel confused and lost, and you always want to encourage them to ask you questions. You don't want people to be scared to tell you they're lost or confused, and if you start doing that kind of thing, if you start laughing at them or even just sort of snorting to yourself or chuckling or acting impatient and annoyed, if you do those things, people are going to start clamming up. They're going to not want to tell you when they're confused or lost. And that's terrible. You want people to feel very open, happy to make mistakes. Even a student that appears to be really confident probably still feels slightly embarrassed or ashamed just a little bit deep down if they make a mistake in front of you or in front of other classmates. And in that moment of vulnerability, it's important that you lift them up and not put them down. That's your job as a teacher. Last but not least, number 10, always be encouraging and positive and supportive. When a student does something well, be sure to tell them. Tell them that you were impressed that they learned something so quickly. Tell them you're impressed at how fast they got to the answer. Tell them that you're impressed that they just got the answer right at all. It's really just important to be encouraging. If your teacher is getting you pumped up and motivated and feeling good about the lesson and telling you you're doing a great job learning, you're going to be a lot more focused, a lot more engaged, and just, it's going to be easier to learn in that situation. And that is it. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed my top 10 teaching tips. I'm sure there are so many other great words of advice that other people have, so please write them in the comments. I know there are a lot of other teachers that subscribe to my channel and a lot of students here as well. And students certainly have good advice about teaching as well, because as a student, we observe different teachers throughout our lives and we see what works better from one teacher than another. I mean, honestly, the best preparation to being a teacher is really just to be a student. So if you've ever been either a teacher or a student at any time in your life, which I'm sure you probably have, and you have good teaching advice to give that I might have left out, write it in the comments below. I always find it fascinating to read different teaching advice. I'm always trying to think of new techniques and new ways to teach. So please let me know in the comments below. I'm sure other people would love to read your teaching advice as well too. So let me know if I forgot anything. Thank you guys again so much for watching. If you're new to my channel, hello and welcome. My name is Gracie Terzian. I post one video a week here on YouTube. And if you like this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with a friend, leave a comment. All those fun things really help me out a lot. And if you want to see more of this content, be sure to subscribe to my channel. That is it for today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next week, and have a good rest of your day or night.